Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I'm your host as always. It's so hard to believe that we already have 7 of these under our belt. It's been such a privilege to be able to facilitate these conversations with jazz musicians that I really respect and admire, and just learn so much from them as we're talking. I try to stay out of the way the majority of the time and let them talk as much as possible, but just the exchange is so soul enriching, especially in a time where social interaction is so limited, based on just trying to keep us all safe and get on the other side of this mess. So anyways, going into today's episode, it's episode 7, Dr. Russell Haight. Russell teaches down at Texas State University, which is where I did my undergraduate degree, and in the amount of interaction that we had while I was there, I mean, Russell is really somebody who we all aspire to be as a jazz musician. His use of his ear is absolutely incredible. His composing, his arranging, his playing, his improvisation, he's just the perfectly well-rounded musician, and he'd never let you know it from talking about it because he's so humble. His humility is incredible, which just makes him that much more of a desirable kind of role model to shape ourselves after as gigging and professional musicians. So we talk a little bit about just how he built his ear up to the point where it's at, and transcribing, and how that's looked different throughout different ages of technology, and how we've been able to have a little bit more ease where it's not just breaking CD players from rewinding it 100 times in rapid succession, to now we can just go on YouTube and slow it down to 25% without the pitch for the most part being totally distorted. So we talk a lot about that. We talk about the things he has in mind whenever he's composing originals, and that narrative that's there, and whether or not it's a specific narrative or it's something that is just more of creating a vibe, and crazy gig stories of why you never get the fight song wrong for somebody's wedding or the school of which they want their fight song. It was really entertaining to hear about, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it as we kind of have that closing question, like we always do, of the craziest gig story that they can remember. So a couple things to plug real quick before we jump into the episode is David Mescateek's album that he released last year. This is an ongoing thing that I'm talking about with also recognizing great people in the jazz community and their records, even if they didn't just come out, even though 2019 is relatively not very long ago at all. We want to make sure to bring those to light and let people know that these albums are incredible. So David Mescateek's Preamble is a really great record that has Fabio Augustinus on drums, it has Ben Triche on bass, and David Mescateek on piano, kind of illustrating that trio vibe that David has been working towards as a band leader. He has a couple guests on the record, which is Matthew Maldonado on a blues tune called Last Minute Blues, and then I'm also a guest on it on, it must be like the 4th or 5th track, which is Like Someone in Love. Definitely go check that out. It's so great, and David, just as a band leader, really shines, and his arranging skills are really great, and I enjoy it so much, and I'm glad to have him as a collaborative partner on my records and my projects as well. Another person that I want to give a shout out to and definitely go check out is a new release. Fabio Augustinus wrote a piece for jazz orchestra for the UT Jazz Orchestra to be premiered this spring, but obviously with COVID, it didn't quite happen exactly how he thought it was going to, and so he decided to do it entirely virtual and record it remotely, which you would never know it. It sounds amazing, and his ability to put that all together is really speaks for itself. But that's over on Bandcamp, and it's a mega work. It's like 10-12 minutes, and all of it is so good. I've listened to it several times already, and you should go check that out and support that. So that's over at fabioaugustinus.bandcamp.com, and like always, I have this link right below, so you'll be able to access it with ease, and we'll continue to plug other people's records as time goes by, of people who are currently in the scene, or maybe people who have moved away from Austin. But again, this is not just limited to the Austin scene. This is trying to bring together our national and global jazz environment together for one big kind of family atmosphere. So anyways, without further ado, I won't talk anymore. I know I say that every week, but let's get into it. Here is episode 7, Dr. Russell Haight. This is Off the Bandstand. Russell Haight, how are you, man?
Good. How's it going?
I'm good, man. I'm so sorry. I promise that this is one of the only instances in which there was traffic works in COVID. Like there actually was. Oh my God,
Yeah.
traffic between the kitchen and the bedroom and here, but in this case, it's real.
Right. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Well, man, how are you? How you holding up?
Boy, I'm hanging in there. Time's all a blur for me, probably like you and just about everybody else. So I'm doing well, but I'm just in a total scramble in a way, getting ready for the upcoming semester, and a lot of the teaching that I'm going to be doing will be remote. So I'm having to restructure the classes and the lessons so that everybody has a great experience, but it's been a pretty constant state of working on that, just generating. I have a lot of content generated, but it's harder when I can't be in the moment with people in the same way. So yeah. That's what I've been doing.
And I mean, like very much like in my, albeit because I wasn't a jazz major, in my brief interactions of seeing you like work, just whether it be in like master classes or just sitting in on rehearsals, trying to make like funny faces at Natty and make them break into a rehearsal. But no, man, like it's a big part of your I guess demeanor is very much that you're very involved. Like no one could ever like watch you teach and say that you were like a passive teacher. You're very involved. You're very like responsive to like everything that's going on. You acclimate to that. So, I mean, to your credit though, I'm sure you will be the last person to have immense amount of trouble making it work for the online stuff. But I'm sure that has to be the craziest thing like going through.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do try to be active, and for whatever reason, once I get into a teaching environment, I feel kind of energized in a way. So, and I don't know. It's nice that I guess it comes through. Sometimes I don't even realize, and I just kind of get into it and in the moment. Similar to playing music in a way, and I sort of feed off that energy. So it's that's one of the really hard things for all of us musically and as an educator, which I guess is a pretty big part of my identity too.
Yeah.
To not be able to kind of share that sort of energy of being in the same time space as people,
Yeah.
But
what did that look like for you, man? Like the last, because we like the last guest, right? Of the last released episode, I should say, Utah, and he was talking about just like that huge switch of those like 2 weeks, right? Where it's like, spring break, but then it was like the transition week, and then just like totally going into that. So what classes were you teaching, and how did you find that equilibrium?
Yeah. I don't know that I found it. I have a kind of a rotating course schedule like a lot of professors. So last spring was actually a lighter semester for me. I just had I had an undergraduate arranging course, and then I had and then my applied studio. So all the, jazz saxophone students that I was teaching. So like this fall, I have a lot more on my plate than that. I have a lot more students, a lot more classes, and all the classes are little bit overloaded. So it'll be a little busier this fall. Of course, I have more time to prepare. But yeah, last spring, that was really tricky, and just making that transition. I do a fair amount of stuff online as it is in terms of like assignment submission with the classes, but boy, I don't know. That was just a crazy kind of huge shift to happen, and it was also tricky, like on the students. So what I found myself doing, and I don't know how effective any of it was, but I would do some things like we would have a collective Zoom sort of studio class where we would either, pretty informal, kind of hang out and talk, or Q&A, things like that. But also a lot of the assignments and the class and lesson teaching was all done kind of asynchronously. And I did that by design, actually, to just try to be as respectful as I could. I don't want to assume anybody has access to a computer or a practice space or all that kind of stuff. So a lot of it, I set up a whole kind of set of modules that were to be done asynchronously, like recorded submissions and things like that for lessons. And then we would have a couple of, kind of in-person collective things that people would join in on Zoom. So that's how I handled it in the spring. It's going to be a little bit different in the fall because I have more time to prepare. And I also took this, it was a sort of a mandate from the university, but an online teaching certification, which was, it's this class on teaching online. And I learned a tremendous amount in that. And I can see in hindsight all the things I kind of did wrong in the spring. But at the same time, it was sort of like everyone was just flying by we're flying by the seats of our pants, trying to figure out how to structure recitals and juries. And, that was just, we made it work, as jazz musicians do. And I'm looking to kind of up my game and have it be, in a lot of ways, a much better and richer experience for everybody in the fall. So, and actually I do that with my teaching anyway. I really reevaluate my material and my structure and the assignments, and I'm constantly, similar to working on one's playing or anything, like, playing an instrument or singing or whatever, working on the craft of music. I'm always trying to get tighter with my teaching, just, really get to the important stuff in a clear way and have it be organized, and just super useful experience for everybody. So that's where I'm at with all that.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody, like past or present, or future for that matter, like students could ever say like a thing about any of your teaching. And not to just totally go on, butter your bread and be like, all right, let me just give cram as many like compliments to the great Dr. Russell Haight, as possible. But really, I mean, it does feel so, and even in our talks and whenever I will commission some of those tunes for some transcribed charts, I mean, everything just feels so succinct. And like to the point where I could call you up out of the blue and you're like, oh yeah, no, this is exactly what that is. I mean, it's so obvious and evident that you have a really in-depth knowledge where you know it backwards and forwards, where it's not just like, okay, I know my, talking points and like, here's this in the book. It's like, you could be the book and you would be fine. So I'm sure like any alternative kind of classwork setting, still will be just as like, as rich as could be given the circumstances of where we're at. How's that, I mean, not to pry too much personally, but how is that kind of
that's okay.
Affected the psyche part of like the teacher part of your mind? Because it's kind of like, you don't really have that much time to focus on the emotions of it because you're just like, all right, we got to get this done. But I mean, another thing too, that's a hot topic is like, a large amount of Americans, not to get political, but are kind of like undervaluing not only what teachers do in general, but undervaluing kind of how many hoops they're having to jump through to accommodate so quickly, when this is usually something that takes like years of training in order to, you know, effectively do like an online type thing. So like, how has that affected kind of the personal side whenever it's like you lay your head on the pillow at night and you're like, all right, here we go, you know?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're really kind with your comments here, but you know, man, it's tricky because a lot of I feel like a lot of what I try to do as a teacher, I'm always trying to put myself on the other side of the situation. Like, what's it like for somebody sitting out there? And I do that when I'm developing materials. And actually, you know, one of the things that is true for me is that I kind of started a little bit later on my music trajectory. So I don't have to try that hard sometimes. I actually can vividly remember really not feeling like I was understanding things, and then having to kind of go through this process and figuring them out. And then it's like, oh, I have that aha moment. And that's something I like to, of course, all educators like to have that moment in the classroom. The thing that I'm finding right now that's really hard is like putting myself in students' shoes right now. I mean, I'm having a hard time putting myself in my own educator role. So that's something that I normally feel like I have a pretty good barometer for when the content is either too much stuff or too complicated, or the assignments are cumbersome. I feel like I generally, over the years, you know, I've just gotten better at sort of calibrating that when I'm designing a class and designing the content that goes with it. Yeah. Because of this remote learning, that's the one thing, I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but that's the one thing that I'm really struggling to kind of gauge where those, you know, how to calibrate it. Like, sure. What's too much stuff, what's not enough, what's going to make people feel like they're really engaged and part of the community, and what's going to feel just like busy work and stuff that they have to put on the calendar. And that's the thing for me. It's uncharted waters, like most of us. And you know, that's kind of the biggest one at the moment. And of course, I'm also thinking about when we're talking about especially a music education, especially jazz education, you know, so much of that degree path, and I think it's true for most of the arts, certainly applied arts and things like that, fine arts. I feel like it's the community and the kind of network and all the stuff that happens that it's who you're sitting next to, who you run into, who you hear in the practice room next door. So that's the stuff that's kind of weighing on me, that I want people to have those kind of rich experiences, because I feel like they get to the real heart and soul of what it means to be pursuing like a music performance path. And so that's something that's hard. And I think about, you know, the incoming freshmen or the returning students and the kind of relationships and community they have. So that's on my mind a lot. And I think that's probably on everyone's mind, you know. And I know that people who have like young kids, and they're talking about sending, you know, my brother's in the situation, talking about sending their son to kindergarten or do it remotely, all these kinds of things. And you think about, especially in those formative years, and I feel like college, you know, undergrad and graduate both are still formative times, you know. Yeah. And so
because it's like it's relearning like the school environment in a completely different way, because, you know, like even though cognitively we're not as far along like obviously in elementary school as we are like going into like a position of like high school, or even like for me, I kind of had a weird setup where it was K through 4 was one school, that was elementary school. Then it was 5 and 6 was middle school. Then 7 and 8 was intermediate school, and then 9 through 12 was high school. So it wasn't like the K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. It was K through 4. Yeah. And so
actually I had the exact same breakdown in my years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then it feels like you kind of just assimilate to like what is normal, right? Of that kind of structure. But leaving high school and then going to college, it's kind of like starting kindergarten all over again, because it's this new, it not only is it more responsibility, but it's like relearning the classroom setting in a completely different environment, where now you could be in a lecture hall. Like, I mean, most music classes excluded. I mean, this is more of just kind of like general education courses in the first couple of years of your degree, but you could be in a lecture hall of 250 to 500 people, which is obviously a much different kind of environment and much less personal with your professor. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right. It's crazy. And I'm selfishly very glad that I finished before, and I'm not in a collegiate or whatever grad school or anything like that at this point in time. But you're right. And there were a lot of things that you touched on too that I think really resonated, and kind of just further goes on to, praise a little bit of your approach, was saying that you were very much focused on like the people who may not have like practice areas, because I mean, like Lydia and I are in an apartment right now, but I remember talking to Matt Maldonado like 3-4 weeks. Time doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't matter. But like we were talking at some point deep in the quarantine, and he was like, yeah, man, he's like, I feel like I haven't been able to get like a real practice session in a while, because I've just been in my apartment. And it's just like, you're worried like what time of the day, because usually it's like daytime was the time that we could practice if we were home, because everybody's at work. But now everyone's working from home. And do you do it in the evening? But then everybody's trying to relax after work in the evening. So there's no good way. And, don't get me wrong, I love the guy 2 floors down who's really trying to learn Crazy Train and Thunderstruck at 40 beats a minute. I applaud his tenacity, but it's a little much at times,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a huge thing with, even just assuming people have computer or internet access, let alone a practice room space. I don't assume any of that. And I'm currently underway trying to convert my office at Texas State to be a kind of space for my students to be able to use for practicing, and so that they have a place, because it's practicing in an apartment and all that stuff. I mean, it's and that's the kind of the essence of the craft in a lot of ways, especially in those years of being at school. People really need access, and we cannot take that for granted. So it's lots of little, or maybe not so little, lots of problems and things that we're always working on. And you said you had just you did one of these with Utah, is that right?
Yeah, Utah was he's the last episode that has released. We did it back in the beginning of July. We're kind of like,
I see,
in bulk, and
he's done an amazing job just kind of structuring an ensemble rehearsal and getting the logistics figured out with that. I mean, he's really it's been pretty amazing to see how he's dealt with that so well. So I want to give a shout out to my great colleague. So
we'll put his picture up on the side, just with like a golden light behind it,
has an amazing even temperament for all this stuff, and it's really pretty amazing to have a colleague like that, especially in these times. I mean, always, but especially nowadays with all the stuff going on, where it seems like one week to the next, it's kind of everything's in flux, Yeah. So,
well, man.
Anyway,
the COVID quarantine stuff, because that's it can get almost a little monotonous. Not that anything we're saying is not great, but to talk more about you and things about you. So I'm glad that I actually have the record here, because I can do like the Jimmy Fallon thing where it's like, your new record. whatever. But no, man. We'll dive into that in a bit. And even though like it released in 2017, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But to talk a little bit about Destination, before we get into that, I wanted to like kind of do more of kind of getting to know like you and where you came up and like what those influences were like. This isn't like I always say in every episode, and probably the people listening are tired of hearing it, but this is just like super relaxed. It's not like, you know, here has to be like these perfectly thought out or formed answers, but just tell me like a little bit about where you came up, what that experience was like. Was saxophone your first instrument? Just kind of give me the
yeah. Wow. Boy, there's, you know, there's so many things I could say along the way, but I know that for whatever reason, early on, I was always just interested in music. And, you know, when you're a real young kid, they'll have groups that come to school, usually from like the high school in the district. Sure. You know, a band will come and play or something like that. And I think probably like most kids, you know, that really just excited me so much. And, you know, so early on, I always kind of responded to it. And I remember, I think one of my first memories that was kind of specific to jazz, I had a lot of pretty early things that have stuck with me that I've realized as I've reflected on it. But, you know, something in, I want to say maybe third grade or fourth grade was that we had like the high school jazz band came around Christmas time and played like a Christmas show or something.
So cool.
And I remember that was just like the coolest thing, because you kind of know the songs, and then to see it with jazz instruments. So, I mean, kind of from right then and there, I was like, oh, I want to do something like that, you know, whenever that time presented itself. And then, you know, you probably like most folks, you know, you sign up for instruments and all this kind of thing. I can't remember exactly how it came about, but I don't know if there was any kind of an aptitude test or something, but for whatever reason, my first instrument was trombone.
Oh, really?
Actually, in band, yeah. And cool. I had taken just some kind of beginning piano lessons up till that point, and I was interested in music, you know, but I by no means was it like a very serious, you know, heavyweight piano instruction from the age of 3, Suzuki method or anything like that. It was just a local music store I'd go, you know, and I generally enjoyed all that. But, you know, and I started on trombone, and I remember because of piano, I could actually read music a little bit better than other folks. Not amazing, but I could read notes basically. Yeah. And trombone parts in the beginning are pretty much just B flat and F over and over again in all the parts. So, and I remember, you know, you'd see the saxophone players, and because the instrument itself is much more intuitive than something like a trumpet or a trombone. It's, you know, you press buttons and it kind of makes, it's an intuitive instrument, you know, it's just the way that it works, similar to like a recorder, you know, in those days. So
for every sound, there's like another thing that you're putting down. I mean, like, I don't know if you're much into like stand-up comedy or like comedians, but there's a comedian named Pete Holmes. And he has a bit where he's like, this year I want to understand the trumpet. He's like, because like 3 buttons and it plays all of the notes, like it just doesn't, you know, and for someone right. Like that's kind of how they see it, is just like, what's going on? What's all these like different registers and everything? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I only say all this because I remember distinctly, it seemed like that was the cool instrument. Like that's where it's at, because the parts had moving lines, and somehow I don't know exactly, either enough people quit or I don't remember how it happened, but they finally let me switch to saxophone, which was really hard because everybody wants to play saxophone and drums usually, and some trumpet too. But so I was able to switch, and so I played, and I was into it just like in band, but not any real serious study. And then like along the way, you know, when we had, I want to say it was maybe, I guess it was, I got to think about this now. So that was probably around sixth grade. And then when I got to 7, 8, like you were talking about, that was its own school. And that band director actually started like a stage band that met, which I don't know how common that was for that kind of age bracket, but he started one maybe just outside, maybe he just did it on its own. I'm not exactly sure. Might have been after school. I think it might have been after hours, but I would go to stage band. And I remember one time he brought in like a jazz quartet or a jazz trio early on. I might've been in 7th or 8th grade. And it was a small group just playing tunes, a local group. And it was just another one of these moments for me. It was like, it's just, I was immediately so fascinated by the way it sounded. And I was like, I want to know what that is. I want to be able to do that.
Were they playing just like standards, just straight ahead stuff? Or were they playing more?
I think so. I don't honestly remember because, it was so long ago. And like I say, I didn't have some kind of specialized training really else. At that point, my experience was really just kind of limited to what we were doing in band. So I didn't really know the repertoire or anything, but it's a funny thing for me because I sometimes I think jazz can get a little bit of flack or criticism as being elitist or really hard to understand. And I think some of it can be, but I also think there's another dimension where, I don't know, I was hooked right away. I think there's another side to it, like when it's good or something, when it's in, when you're present to it and you're ready to receive it, it's great, without understanding anything about theory it's just, you can get something out of it.
Yeah. I think there's like a couple different, areas of that where like it could hook different people, but the feeling of like just when it feels good, like you don't know why, like it could be anything, but typically with jazz, I mean us, right? Like it just, when it feels good, it's like, I don't know what that is, but it feels good and I want more of that. Or
exactly. Yeah.
Or when it's so like you can tell that something is really, really fantastic, but you can't understand it at all. But there's a like, I want to know what that is. Like in high school for me, that's where I started to get, because Natty was in jazz band by 10th grade. And I remember him like really starting to excel because we went to high school together. We come from, there's like Jackson, right?
Yeah.
And he was starting to play. And I remember being like, because I was primarily a trumpet player at that point with him and band. And I remember jazz auditions were coming up and he was like, yeah, maybe you should try. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got this swing thing down. He was like, swing me a C major scale. I was like, just like the worst kind of like do ba do ba, worst. And he was like, yeah, man, maybe work on that just like a little bit, but still try out, And we had been playing, like a lot of those like, Night Train and just a lot of, I can't remember what the like Mike Tomorrow type chart, just those high school charts. And then I was still hooked. Like I still really enjoyed it. I still loved playing all those tunes. But then I remember like walking in and hearing the band that Natty was in at that. Well, I don't know if he was in at that point. I think he was. Anyways, it was the Bob Cornell's LA big band arrangement of The First Circle, the Pat Metheny tune.
Oh wow!
And
ambitious.
It was very ambitious. I mean, they pulled it off. It sounded great, at least in my memory that I'll preserve. But like I remember hearing the beginning of that, or whatever the pattern is, and I was trying to make sense of it in just like simple meter stuff, and I like couldn't do it. But I was like, I have no idea what this is, but whatever that is, these more like contemporary, very dense uses of the jazz idiom, like that's what I want to know more about, which is what led me down that path. But you're right, it's very much about just this. It can be, verbose in musical, vocabulary, but at the same time, it's like there's something more rewarding about what feels like you have to work at it, as opposed to it's just like, and on a silver platter, here's the music, take it, and that's all it is,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I guess another dimension of that experience was also that the horn player in that group that came to school he was playing alto saxophone, which is what I played at the time. That was my instrument. So there was another kind of a relationship there, aside from just the overall sound and feel of it. I was like, what is that? And it's like, oh man, that guy, I have one of those.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, it felt like I was in the game in some way. And I don't know if I'm going on too long, but I mean, then it kind of, okay. Well, yeah. And then I guess, so that was like 7, 8. And then high school was 9 through 12. And, at that point I was into it, not having really any instruction other than just the basic stuff in school. And when I got to, 9th grade, there was, again, it was like, I think it was Wednesday night, my band director would just do a jazz band rehearsal for an hour and a half, something like that. And kind of extracurricular. It wasn't built in during the day or anything. And, so I can't remember if there was auditions. I don't think so. I think it was just if you were interested, you could go. And I remember I went to the first rehearsal and, first of all, I should say, like, there was charts, he was passing out music, and I had never seen music that complicated in my life. I mean, I was just terrified. Yeah. I mean, there was like 16th notes on one of the pieces. I mean, it was really like, I was about ready to break just sitting there before even playing a note, because I knew I was in so far over my head, which, if there's a common theme in my life, I guess, as a musician, it's like I always end up in these situations where I'm in kind of over my head, where I'm the weak link or something like that. And that's actually, I think, probably been a good thing, but yeah, I remember yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, just a very small addition to that is like that's where I actually like prefer to be is maybe it's because I picked a common joke that I make is like I picked the two like most arrogant attracting people instruments, which is like being a singer and a trumpet player. And so maybe that's why I'm like craving always to be the dumbest person in the room to like curb that, natural desire to maybe have more of that, arrogance, for lack of a better, more, less incriminating term, I should say. But yeah, no, it feels good to feel like, oh my gosh, everyone around me is like doing all these things, and you just learn by osmosis in that way. So anyways, not to veer.
Yeah, no, I mean, to this day, I feel like that all the time. And I'm grateful and constantly humbled by the situations I'm in and the people I get to work with. It's just, that's what happens with this music. But anyway, I remember at some point, I don't know if it was in the first rehearsal, but my band director, who was just like a huge influence on me in a lot of ways that I almost didn't realize until a little later. His name is Rick Hambright, and he was at the beginning of the jazz band rehearsal, he would put on, I think it was probably the Aebersold major 7, B flat major 7 with that bossa nova groove. Yeah. And everyone would go around and play like 8 bars or 16 bars, just improvising on the scale.
Yeah.
And man, between that and the notation, I was just so, I mean, like my heart was like beating out of my chest. I'm like, oh, what do I do? What is this? And I remember, I was in the saxophone section and I just played alto at that point, and it was either right next to me or very close. There was a guy playing tenor, and I think he was a senior, and he played these, 16 bars. And I don't know, it might have been awful for all I know. But but the thing was, I was sitting right next to it. I remember like looking at this guy's belt, and it was like magic. I was like, what is that? It was another one of those really formative moments. And, I say that because a lot of the way that it seems like it happened to me, and maybe it's just my memory, it's like I'd have these little moments of inspiration and they would kind of carry me through for these sometimes very long and difficult bursts of trying to get better.
Yeah.
So that one, I actually distinctly remember that. It was another one of those, like, what is that? How do you do that? And also in that, I believe it was that freshman year of high school, you know, my band director, and there was two of them there, and they were both great guys. You know, he saw I was interested and into the music. So I don't know exactly the story, but you know, I'm from upstate New York, and is
that where you came up? Was upstate New York?
Yeah, that's where I grew up. Yeah. And kind of in that same time period, it was, I think it was fall of my freshman year of high school. You know, my band director said, "Hey, I have these tickets to a Sonny Rollins concert. I can't go that night if you want them." And it was, yeah, because, you know, Sonny Rollins, he actually lives, it was south of where I grew up, but he lives in upstate New York. And there's a music hall in Troy, New York called the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, which is a great space for acoustic music for classical and jazz. And they had all kinds of artists there, but there was a really nice concert series they'd have every year. And Sonny Rollins was in, I think it was that fall. It might've been the year later. I can't remember the exact time, but I think it was then. And he gave me tickets, and to this day, I always wondered if he actually had tickets and couldn't go, or just bought me tickets. Like, he's that kind of a guy. He like would have bought me tickets and just given them to me just because I was interested in it. And man, I don't know if you've ever seen Sonny Rollins live when he was, you know, kind of pre-retired. Yeah, I've seen him live. I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times. I actually got to meet him, which is a crazy story. But yeah, you know, he is, I knew who he was, not in any huge detail at that point, but I knew he was like a jazz heavyweight though. And if you ever see him, I mean, he's kind of a bigger guy, but it's more just his presence, you know. He's got robes and a beard and sunglasses, and he's, at the time, you know, he was, you know, a lot younger. We're going back 20 plus years now, but I mean, he's very physical with the horn, and he looks like a god on the stage, just like the getup and the way he relates to the saxophone. I mean, it's like a seriously almost a kind of spiritual thing to see an artist like that, you know. And with the way he started, I think he maybe does this, but you know, the lights go down and he's like in the dressing room or backstage, and he just starts playing solo, and you just hear this sound off stage for a few minutes, and then he's playing his solo cadenza, and he walks out and he's playing. I mean, it's one of these things where I almost get teary-eyed or goosebumps when I think about it now, because it's just like, it was one of these moments. I was like, what is that? It's incredible, you know? And that was another thing that was so formative for me. And once I had that, I mean, that kind of like knocked it into a different category for me of, I don't know if it's a calling. I don't know what the word is, but I was like that. I felt really so deeply moved by that concert, but in particular, just, it wasn't just his playing. It was like his presence and his energy and whatever he was generating in that hall. I mean, it was like, it just knocked me out. So,
well, I mean, something that like immediately made me think of was the idea that, I mean, seeing people play live, we don't really want there to be this artifice of like, and now this is a concert. Like, if anything, we want the most organic, you know, idea of like, we have now just like peeked into the environment or the world that this group and the people in the group have like created, as opposed to like, you know, the benefactor comes on stage, says, you know, Sonny Rollins is one of the heavyweight, jazz people. We don't really
Yeah.
need that. So for him to just start and it feel like, oh, he's just going to be traveling from all these different like rooms, and he's in this other room, and we're just like waiting for our turn to experience the most natural form of that, is so incredibly special, because it doesn't feel like anything is artificial. It's just like we are getting pure, unadulterated, inorganic, or we're just getting the most organic version of Sonny Rollins or whoever in that way.
Well, and I mean, he's kind of famously known to do that. Like in terms of something closer to maybe a pure improvisation where, it's jazz, but he really can push the limits, and in a way where it's very risky in a sense, that some of the musical things that he does. And, that's why there's one of those famous things that there's two Sonny Rollins. There's the kind of live Sonny Rollins and the studio one, and how there's a little bit of a discrepancy in some of his recordings that as the critics say, which,
sure.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Don't worry,
or critics.
That clip right there is like the little promotional clip for this episode. It's, there's a discrepancy between, and then that's it. I'll just cut it in the most incriminating way.
Oh yeah, I mean, who am I to say anything anyway? But so I'm kind of given some of these highlights, and that was one. And then also one of the benefits of growing up in the Northeast, upstate New York, was that there was more jazz closer, New York City and Boston. And there was a jazz club within an hour of where I was. And, players would come up from New York. It was just a lot easier to get there, so, and largely because of that same band director. I saw some pretty amazing shows. I saw Michael Brecker Quartet live. I saw Phil Woods with Nick Brignola. I saw Pat Metheny. Just like up close, stuff that you're sitting in front of or in the room and hearing it acoustically in a small club, in a way that like at that time, I don't think, Michael Brecker, this was in like the 97 to 98, 1997, 1998. It wasn't like he was playing small rooms. He's headlining festivals and selling out amphitheaters around the globe, and then I get to go to a concert and, sit 10 feet in front of him, stuff like that. So, all that stuff just kind of stoked the flames, but the thing was, a lot of it is like, I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I was kind of in love with the sound of it, and I was buying records, but I didn't have real formal studies other than my band director. And he was so generous with his time, and he was, he's a brilliant, really a brilliant educator and a total musician, kind of a player. He played all the woodwinds, double reeds, flute, clarinet, saxophones. He could play jazz, he could read, he could play styles. It was just like a consummate musician. He would turn me onto records and, let me borrow books, and this, he's just kind of fueling that thing. So that's before graduate school. That was kind of it for my jazz education. And I did play in like all region jazz band and stuff, but the thing was, I didn't have like really formal jazz training. I think I took a few saxophone lessons kind of here and there, maybe like 5 total over the course of those years. But I just, I couldn't read music great. I didn't really know theory. But the thing was, I listened to jazz a lot, and I would just copy records a lot, which I think in hindsight was the better way, but it also led to, at that point, some pretty erratic results where I go into an audition and it's like, man, there's people there who have been taking private lessons. They could sight read anything. They had all the the gear. They knew exactly all this. And I didn't know all of that, but I had maybe a little bit more of an organic relationship to it. And I was doing things like playing along with records. At that point, that's a lot of what I was doing. And that's a lot of how I learned, even through school, when I was in grad school. And to this day, I still do that, all the time, almost every practice session. So anyway, that's kind of my early years.
Yeah. Well, man, that's like, I feel like I can relate from my undergraduate years of because there was no jazz vocal program, right? And well, at least exclusively, like mixes or anything like that. But so I went the classical route, and more or less just to know the inner workings of how to like unlock the fullest kind of sound. I mean, you hear like Ron Euland sing, and you're like, you sound like God himself, just like cracked open the sky. So like, how do you do that? And I was so glad that I was able to do that. But I have to admit that even in, my, maybe I can crudely dub it like a opera studies type degree, even with music studies with the EdCert, I felt like all these other people that I was in class with, there was a disconnect, because I would go and I would do my work and I would, learn the required operas and different excerpts and things in Lipton's class and such. But really my mind, and occasionally there'd be like an earphone in where I was like listening to, Kurt Elling records and stuff like that. Cause I was like, like we'd be learning about L'Orfeo, right, in Lipton's class, but Kurt's singing about L'Orfeo in his Dexter Gordon Body and Soul, thing. So I was like, okay, well, how can I like relate things together? And then trying to hit the stand. I mean, from freshman year, I was starting to I very graciously was given, the opportunity to start doing big band stuff, and then, starting to hit the stand every night. So by playing mostly with like David and Ben Trish, David Mescatique, right? Sure. And hearing like all of the stuff. And I mean, David's just like an incredibly like gregarious, I mean, he's just very focused on like just improving all the time. I was starting to hear things about them and their improvisation and David's like reharmonizations and things that he would do. And I'd be like, I love that. And I know that sound, but I couldn't tell you like the inner workings of like what he's playing and why he's playing it. But if you played it for me, I'd be like, oh, that's that sound. And so I would start to get that more like by osmosis, which like you said, can in hindsight sometimes be the better way, because you're learning organically through like a school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
That's why I love so much whenever I have you like transcribe those charts for me and I say, oh, okay, yes. And I'm noticing that this is apparent in some more of those like Stu Mindeman things, right? But I'll be like, oh, I don't know what it is, but then I'll notice the similarities when you chart that out for me, and I'm trying to learn kind of that backwards type way. Where did that come from? Like your ability from not feeling like you could read music the best to being able to tell me exactly what voicing the guy is using just by listening to the record. I mean, it's like a superhuman skill to me to listen to you, talk about that.
Oh, wow. Wow. In a way, maybe it's the same reason I wasn't, not even that I am now, but the same reason that music reading wasn't kind of my first way of engaging. I think that's actually, I think it is the better way. And I think that has helped me connect a kind of sound with something that's not notated for whatever reason. And I mean, I don't know if I said that very well, but I feel like because I was never going to the written page for material, it made me have to learn to develop my ears, which is something I'm doing all the time. And, that's something that over the years I have, I've transcribed a lot. And And when I say transcribe, I'm using that loosely because in terms of formal notated out full length solos, I've only done a handful of those, but in terms of, you know, moments of music, slices of like you're talking about a voicing or a line or a part of a tune. I mean, I have done so much of that. I mean, thousands and thousands of notes over the years. And I think some of that it's a little tricky because this is a thing of nowadays where all the music is available, all the transcriptions are out there, all the books are on PDF if you start searching around. And I think there's something to be said for not having those resources. At least for me, when I would hear sounds and I wanted to know what they were, there was only one option, and the option was to just grind it out. And even the ability to slow something down without changing the pitch, I mean, I couldn't really do that. So there's so many things that I did along the way where, I mean, I would just be going back a few seconds trying to do it with a cassette tape sometimes, or a CD, like burning out a CD player because I'm trying to scroll back 6 seconds and I'm doing it 200 times to hear that. And it's funny because that is definitely the longer way at first. I mean, it's just long and slow and arduous, but in the bigger picture, it's actually the shorter way, because at some point or another, I feel like everybody has to kind of do that level of listening and ear training where it's almost like some combination of trial and error and theory knowledge and just sitting at a keyboard and just plunking it out. And I've just done a ton of that. I mean, to a point where, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but sometimes I'll be on a gig or something and somebody's like, do you have perfect pitch? Or some of the students, because like if they play something, some sample from a record or some line they're working on, I mean, I can usually play it back right away in 12 keys and all this. And that's not perfect pitch. It's just having done a lot of that. I feel like I say that because I don't know that that's necessarily even a special skill. I feel like at a certain point, everybody's got to kind of get in the game at that level. And it's funny because a lot of the theory knowledge I had is in this kind of same reversal that we're talking about, where I had a sound or a shape or something and it was all there. I just didn't really have a name for the phenomena that I was hearing. And so the names kind of came later. So anyway, I don't know if that answered the question. I mean, I guess the other thing is that piano is the whole game for me with that, because if I was just a single line player on the woodwinds, my ears would be, my perspective would be so narrow on that. Like I say this a lot to my students and things. I don't even know how I'd function actually, because when I have the horn in my hands, like I'm trying to hear the sort of total sound environment, and that's not just voicings or chords; it's the whole thing. So for me, just along the way, I never had official jazz piano training, but I just kind of worked through. I started real simple, like roots, thirds, and sevenths. There used to be this page on the back of one of the Abersalds or one of those guides from years ago. I remember I got this thing in high school. It just was like 2-5-1 voicings. And I just worked on those just out of my own interest in it, trying to figure out what it was. And over the years, what's happened is that as my kind of piano voicing knowledge gets better, it's like my ears get better. It's such a one-to-one thing. And and I feel like every jazz player at a certain point, you got to deal with the piano. And I don't mean on any kind of performance level. I just mean, I don't know how else you can get the kind of dimensions of harmony and context for a single line. And even if it's just playing a melody, if you don't have that harmonic context or some kind of setting for it, I don't know how you retain stuff, but I don't know.
that's all like incredible and so absolutely true. I mean, like my introduction to piano stuff was, and not to incriminate myself or the person who passed me on my piano proficiency, but I probably shouldn't have passed my piano proficiency at that time. Like at that halfway point of my undergraduate with what I had then. But I remember like my sophomore year of college, I started teaching just like vocal students, and like I always say it was like the worst job interview ever, like on my part, because I was telling them not to give me the job because I was like, I don't know, I could play maybe like I can pick out, because of my knowledge now of the circle of fifths, that a D major chord is just like D, F sharp, and A, and I'm going to play the same voicing in both hands, and I'm just going to double what I'm playing in one hand to the other. And then like for one reason or another, I feel like we are all kind of being almost viewing our professors or viewing our teachers with like a certain level of scrutiny until we feel that we've like vetted them in our lack of knowledge, that we feel like they, we think that they know what they're talking about. So like, I feel that entirely, because you're like one-on-one with this student. So I was like, I got to make sure that my piano skills are like up to par, or at least passable. And once I started doing that, and then like, I remember I had one student like a year in who wanted to start doing jazz standards. I had a lead sheet, right, which was in my, real book lead sheet that was in my book that I would give to, I'll never forget Ross Margitza. You knew Ross, right? When it was in town.
Yeah.
Ross, I remember us playing a gig at the Brass House in 2016, rest in peace. But we were playing a gig at the Brass House, and it was the first time Ross was on, and it was me, and I think it was Durham, and Matt, and Dan Dowling, and somebody else. I think Natty was there. And I had given Ross the book, and he opens it up and just like flips through all of them, sees they're all just like standard real book things, and throws the book on the ground. It's like, I'm good. And I remember thinking it was so arrogant at the time, but then he started playing and I was like, oh no, he just like knows these tunes, and like nothing has like a super specific arrangement or roadmap. But anyways, like I remember looking at those chart and being like, okay, my student wants to do this tune, and it just doesn't sound right when I try to like dumb it down or take out some of the most like specific, sharp 9, sharp 11, flat 13, like those kind of things. So I was like, I'm really going to need to do this. And then it wasn't until I started doing that that improvisation and scatting made, and trumpet for that matter, made so much more sense, because it was like you said, in ways that I hadn't thought about before, of just like a single line instrument. You'll never be able to get the full picture, because we are not an instrument that is like voice, trumpet, saxophone. We're not an instrument that focuses on the big picture. We're focused on like, how do we fit in, which is its own discipline, but at the same time, it's all about like having at least a passable amount of any sort of like rhythm section instrument or chordal instrument, I should say. So yeah, you couldn't be more spot on. Like I remember Winking telling us like that story of like someone showed up and was the new piano chair at the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and before he even played a note, like all of the people who were like horn players in the band could sit down and still be a super killing piano player. And the guy was like, well, yeah, everyone knows their shit here, because it's just a prerequisite to being great.
Yeah, I don't know how else you can get into the depth that the music requires without at some point dealing with things like that. So yeah, and I like playing piano. I mean, I it's nice to not have a horn hanging off your neck all the time. So
sure.
A lot of the times when I'm teaching, maybe too much actually, I'm on the piano while the student's on the saxophone, because I'm trying to work through and kind of give some context for things like that. And yeah, it's anyway, piano.
Yeah, piano. Right. Well, man, I do want to, and I also want to be respectful of your time. I know that we didn't really talk about the typical length of the podcast, which is a bad.
Yeah. When are we going to start recording?
Oh yeah, well actually, right now. Here we go. Boom. Yeah, there it is. No, but just like briefly. Usually we do like around to like the 90-minute mark. But do you have like a hard out? Do you have a time that you need to be gone?
I have 5:30. Yep.
5:30. Okay. Well, then I'll make sure that it's plenty before that, so you have time to get.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, man. So with Destination, I'm glad that you brought up the thing where you were saying, of how, or at least it felt like we were kind of hinting at like how much at the time are we able to appreciate of what we're listening to, even though we know it's this really amazing thing. Back in 2017, I was still, and even now, obviously, like I'm still, despite the newly added facial hair that shows that time has passed, like, I'm still very much trying to figure out all of these things. I'm still very young, but especially in 2017, when I listened to this, like, I remember everybody in the School of Music and David and Ben, we were all talking, we were like, man, like his Tenderly is just like amazing. And I knew that standard. So I'd really dived into that. And I had listened to the album several times, and you graciously, we traded albums.
Yes. Yeah.
But like listening through, I was like, oh man, these things feel really good. But now, as I've listened to it a lot over the past like 2 weeks since we've been talking and just preparing to talk a little bit more about this, it's been this whole other awakening of like, this is an incredibly killing record that is like, not a single tune feels like it's certainly not in performance, but sometimes you can almost feel like certain tunes are on records as like filler. Nothing feels that way at all. On this record from a composition standpoint, whether it be like your own originals or arrangements of standards, or like the presentation of the musical, or I should say music itself, not musical. And there were like a few that I wanted to talk about in specific to your composition side of things, and also just how you view like arranging when you're approaching that. So the one that really stuck out in the past couple of days was Sleepwalking. I really love Sleepwalking. And maybe because it plays a little bit more to the side of me that wants, things that are a little darker, a little less kind of expected harmonically speaking.
Sure.
So that's an original, right? Like you wrote that thing?
It is an original. It is based, it's maybe not super obvious. It's actually based on You Stepped Out of a Dream.
Oh, cool.
But it's kind of, it's a derangement in a lot of ways. It's a contrafact that kind of went really far, maybe too far. But yeah, it's absolutely an original. I mean, there's really nothing other than that the chord progression that's kind of left of You Stepped Out of a Dream. The rest of it is, there's a lot of other stuff in there. So yeah.
Like, I guess that then partially answers like part of the question I was going to ask, but I'm always fascinated with now having done, the minimal amount, albeit of composing and lyric writing that I've done. But, I always like to think as a vocalist, right? Like we are telling stories. It doesn't matter if it's straightforward or if it's in the abstract. And it's no exception also for instrumentalists in the same way. But obviously with lyrics, I have to find like a pretty clear way to craft a narrative based on the vehicle of my telling the story is the lyrics, as opposed to where I think with instrumentalists, it can have a very specific narrative. And after the fact, they can explain, at this point, this is what, scenic view I had. Or it could just be like a vibe or a certain like memory or dream. Where does that come from? Like, or how does that manifest in your writing as far as like a narrative or just a vibe, or like how do you, and specifically with Sleepwalking, like where does that come from?
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, I mean, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen to the record. it's a document of a time. There's so much I would change about it now. And those guys, Daniel Durham, Sean Giddings, and Wayne Salzman II, those guys played so great. I mean, I just want to, I know I'm not answering right away,
No,
but you know, I did that record it's all original compositions and arrangements. And I don't think we played any of that as that band before the session. So we were, we were putting that music together in the studio, and none of us were really comfortable on it. And that is not how I want to do a record, but also it was about having a deadline and using a deadline to make something happen. So I just want to give a shout out to those guys for bringing that music to life, especially under really, and I also need to say, I know you work with him as well. Charlie Kramsky was such a huge part of that. And I mean, that guy's just unbelievable. And he's as much of an artist on that album as anybody else. So anyway, I say that because it was a tall order to try to go in and do that. And it was not really how I wanted to do it. But, I don't know that there's ever ideal situations. Like if to do a whole presentation of original music and arrangements, the much better way is to have a band that's played that material, and you collaboratively and collectively kind of find it over the course of several gigs, several weeks and months on the bandstand. And then the recording session is a document of that sort of working out that the band had. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen. So we had to try to find some magic on the day, which is, it is.
To the entire, and Charlie included, because like you said, I mean, Charlie's just like, to watch him work selfishly, I almost, and I'm glad I got to do this with David's record, but I got to just watch him for the majority of the day, as opposed to like, because when you're in the studio and you have a 10-hour day, and it's like, as the band leader or whatever, you have to just keep going. And so you don't get to fully appreciate until like after the fact of how much work everyone's doing, because it's just kind of, it's a one-track mind when you're in the studio.
Yeah.
But to his credit, to your credit, to the whole band's credit, it does not feel that way at all whenever listening. But I do.
That's good.
Yeah, but I do understand that feeling of like, it's hard to disassociate the feelings that we had when we were in the studio that day with the product, because you're just melding those two together, and you're like, well, somebody's going to call BS on me at some point. But from an outside perspective, it does not feel that way at all.
Well, thanks. I think that there's some real successful moments and some less so, and mostly on my end. But in any case, you're asking about that tune Sleepwalking. And I don't know if I can remember the exact question, but the space I try to write from is the space of, to use an overused word, vibe or quality of mood. And that is something that I find the more I'm in playing music, especially jazz, I think that's something that is very important to me to be aware of, is the quality of mood that and that's actually true even if you're playing a standard. I'm trying to create a kind of a mood or an environment. It's gosh, I can't remember. I want to say the great pianist Billy Childs, pianist composer from L.A. I think he said something in an interview like that you want your music to provide the ability for the audience to kind of project something onto it, to kind of, and so I sort of think about that more than anything. And when I'm writing, I start with that in mind. And the thing I say even to students, or when I'm thinking about a set, it's like back in the day. I mean, I'm old enough, mixtapes, where you'd have all the tapes and you would choose the order of songs, and you would choose the amount of space between the songs, and you could fade out with not all that kind of stuff. It's that sort of producer mindset. So when I'm thinking about a set of music for an album or an arrangement or an original for a band, I'm usually there's an established repertoire, or like in the case of the record, it's like, okay, maybe I've got 6 or 7 tunes written, but I don't have something that's in this certain kind of quality of mood that I want. So then I'll start to write with that I say pretty clear in my mind, although it's an abstract thing that we're talking about, but it's like, it's got to kind of be in a direction.
Yeah.
And that is something that I am, I'm thinking about that when I'm playing live on the saxophone too. It's not just when I'm trying to write a tune or arrange a tune. It's like, I'm always trying to tap into like, what's the energy and the mood that's going on right now, and how can I play something that's kind of in line with that energy flow and not kind of pulling it, even if it's correct. I'm trying to contribute to a certain unified energy that a band is putting out there, and I feel like that's something that I've learned from playing with great musicians, where they have such an ability to kind of create that sonic space, and they can do it on anything. So that's something that I when I'm writing and arranging, I'm keenly aware of. And I will say something that sometimes I think, because jazz can be a very difficult music. There can be a lot of theory and rhythms, and there's just a lot of complexity, harmony, melody, rhythm, and the sonic dimension, the kind of big four of music. They're all very, maybe not complex, but they're all being engaged in rich ways in jazz all the time. And I think as a student of the music, which we all are, perpetually,
yeah.
I think it's easy to have your head in that side, in the theory, in the scales, and you need to know that, and you do need to do a lot of thought about that. I think if the thinking kind of stops there, it never gets off the ground. When I was talking about those kind of early formative experiences where the music felt like it made sense and spoke to me, I think that happens to listeners and the band as well. But I think that comes from a space where you're in touch with that quality of mood, or almost like thinking like a producer. And I don't mean it in any kind of a selling out sort of way.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like creating like that Billy Childs quote. It's like creating a kind of sound palette that people can project something that they feel onto it, and allowing that to happen, and not just, playing all your kind of slick stuff. And and I've been guilty of that, as we all have. And I think a lot of times and I'm always, I don't want to act like I've got anything figured out by any means. I certainly do not. I have a lot of times learned by kind of doing it the wrong way, where I'm like, I have a little bit of an agenda, or there's something I've kind of worked out that I'm like, oh, this will work. And it's like, yeah, but it really didn't come from the place where it's kind of pointing toward that kind of quality of mood. And that might even mean not playing, having the horn there and not doing anything, and these are the lessons I'm constantly learning. And I'm always humbled, playing with great people, here in Central Texas and anywhere. It's, I'm always trying to get better at that. And that's a hard thing, because we study and we go into depth, and we shed all this stuff. And, for me, I'm still in the shed a lot, hours a day. I'm really trying to get better and expand. And then to go out there and to have I don't know if it's a humility or the discipline or whatever, to just leave that aside.
Yeah.
Enough kind of confidence to not play any of it, which when you it gets real deep. Like, you're like, oh yeah, I have the confidence to do to play the true thing for that moment.
Yeah.
Boy, that's really hard when you're in the moment sometimes. Like, that in a way is its own kind of special skill from jazz, and maybe it's bigger than jazz. Maybe that's about living life a certain kind of way too.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And I mean, that, like, there's so much of that, exactly where just learning that discipline of, I love that you said like, or what, like not to play, like using that space, but to your, to further, validate what you had said, although you need no validation from me, but to validate what you said about the, it's really hard to find that place of like what's most appropriate, not only from like a, cognitive, like, okay, what is most appropriate, but also from like an insecurity level, because especially if you're like following up somebody's solo and you feel like they just like wiped the floor with, every listener, then it's like, oh, well, maybe now it's that killer instinct of like, I need to kill and I need to put as many like things in as possible, as opposed to like letting everybody else fade away and really just saying like, okay, they did this, but instead of building off of that energy and trying to do something that is more than what is appropriate, like how can I almost let that be its own isolated incident and then like truly just listen to what's happening in the band, as opposed to just letting my mind and whatever kind of like frantic state of mind I'm in lead what's going to happen. Any of that made sense. I didn't know. I just kind of went on different areas, but
no, it's a challenge for sure. But it's great. That's part of the pursuit, and
it's
that's
the thrill. Yeah.
Part of the thrill that comes from doing a collaborative art form like that is that as much as we maybe work on things individually, there's this whole other skill set where it comes to how it relates in the moment. And, that's something I need to continue to work on, like we all do. And it's funny though, you also don't want to be on the other side of it where you feel so paralyzed because you're like, oh man, I gotta play the right thing for the vibe. And like that could be so a lot of it, that could be so bad. It's like, oh, I don't want to overplay. Let me underplay. And then it's like, well, then it's like you're trying to manipulate the thing. So it's this act of really, it's truly selfless at best. And
it's like a Goldilocks complex. It's like finding, that not too hot, not too cold, just like what's going to be the right thing. But I mean, there have been
and I feel like so much of that, it goes back to the ears and the listening. And I don't necessarily mean the details of transcribing a voicing.
Sure.
I mean, so much of, sometimes like the students that I work with, because they know I can hear a lot of what's going on in the music right away. Like I can right away usually pick out a chord progression. I mean, I shouldn't say it like that, but I often
you can
kind of I can get oriented in the music fairly quickly on a good day. I often can if it's standard kind of material. But it's funny. They're like, oh, do you just see like manuscript paper in your mind and notes and stuff? Actually, nothing could be further from it. I don't think about that at all. Like I'm listening to just the quality of mood and the vibe and the sound, and not even the tone, just the kind of sound print or the fingerprint of a record, and like how's the reverb and what's the energy like, and when I listen to music, that's still kind of where I'm living. And that's part of the reason I listen to lots of different music, because that's not a genre specific thing. And it, there isn't really a value judgment associated with any of that. It's just, if it feels like it creates enough of a picture that a sound picture, so to speak, that I can kind of get something out of and kind of feel something from that sort of in that sonic environment. And that's really how I listen to music. And that's something that, and I'll go layers deeper if I feel like I really need to dig in and analyze, but I certainly don't, I don't just put on music and I'm like, oh, what's that line? Oh, that's that note. And it's a flat 9 and blah, blah, blah. It's
not like Rain Man or like, Hangover, whatever, where it's just all the symbols start popping out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not at all. And I listen to music and I feel like all the most successful music kind of has that ability. And it's a funny thing because even going back, this is a little bit of maybe embarrassing to say, but I'm preparing some transcriptions and examples for the improv class, and I was just going back to So What,
Yeah.
My gosh, kind of blue. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've listened to that record, that tune, Miles solo. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because, we're working remotely and my wife's next door. I'm doing everything with headphones on, and, so I've got my over-ear headphones on, and man, just something about like the reverb and the voicings. I mean, I forget, I don't really forget.
Yeah.
But I was just sitting there listening, like, man, there is such a vibe to this thing.
Yeah.
It's, and I know that's the understatement or the most obvious statement of the century, but it's like, I think all the great records have that. They have a certain kind of energy and life and a sonic thing to them, where it's some combination of the players and the recording space and the way it's put together, and all my favorite records kind of have that.
Yeah.
So I think for writing and arranging, to make a very long circle back here.
Sure.
And when I listen to a record, that's all I kind of want to hear. I want to hear that environment. Of course I wanted to have all these other great things too, but like, if that's not there, it's gonna kind of go over my head. And there is sometimes I think I can understand why. I don't know exactly, but I think maybe people kind of aren't attracted to listening to jazz. And I think sometimes I hear records, and there's things that I do as well, where it's just too much. It's kind of like there isn't a kind of clarity with the mood or the vibe to it. And I think what ends up happening, it can kind of become lost, or it sounds like a wash. In a way, it kind of all sort of sounds the same in a bad way, where it's just like there's not enough of a mood to it. And I don't mean
it starts to sound like what most jazz sounds like to non-jazz people, where it's just kind of like, do I differentiate because I'm not able to latch on to the thing that I have trained my ear to latch on to. I guess. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. Well, man, I want to make sure to be respectful of your time. So 2 very quick questions that we have that I always like to end with.
Wow, the time is going so quickly here. That's crazy. Wow.
I know. So the first speed question is, and obviously, I mean, this opens Pandora's box of like what people could say. It's like, oh man, I have to pick one. But if there's like one record, it could be what's speaking to you this week. Like, if there's one record you would tell people, like, hey, go check this out right now. Like, this is your quarantine listening for, what I would prescribe. You're a doctor. What does the doctor prescribe for listening?
Wow. Oh man. Boy, I've been going back listening to Dexter Gordon Ballads, which is actually it's a compilation record. And I'm a sucker for ballads. I don't know. I just love playing ballads, and Coltrane Ballads is one of my favorite records, that Dexter Gordon compilation. I've been really trying to improve my sound on the saxophone. I'm always doing that. So I've been listening to just a lot of ballad records lately, trying to kind of cop some of that. And Dexter's one that I always come back to. It's been a while since I've circled back. So that's one I would throw out there. I know that's maybe not an exciting answer.
Dude, no, that is like the most exciting answer for me, because me and James Suter always talk about how like ballads, like the second like of my trios, like the first trio was like David and Ben, and then Ben got the house spot and at Parker, and David went to Colorado for it. So then it became James and Thomas Wanglinski. And I mean, that was just like in such a different way. It was so enriching. And I loved so much playing with each trio a lot, which is the bulk of what we would do with like steakhouses and such. But the other thing that was so really great about playing with James and Thomas was they were always like, screw the convention of like you can only play one ballad in a set. Let's do a set full of ballads, or like we would have a name for it, or just that I guess is a little less appropriate now, so I'll edit that out. But no, we would say like the ultimate like big person move was to start a set with a ballad, just like that's like all right, we're really laying it on the table here. So to hear you say the Dexter Gordon Ballads compilation record, I mean, it's an incredible record. So that was exciting for me to hear. So yeah.
Yeah. And I was just also listening, I've got this Monks show coming up. So I was trying to find some different things to play, and I was so I was also just recently listening to some records. The Real McCoy is such a great one with Joe Henderson and McCoy Tyner. I was also listening to, I have it on it's a compilation, or a box set rather, of it's just some of the early Max Roach with Sonny Rollins. And I was just listening to that lately. Stan Getz Sweet Rain. So those few have been, because I was just kind of picking out some tunes for this upcoming gig. So I've been listening to those records also. All great stuff. But it's funny because I listen pretty broadly, and I'm always checking out modern players and old school stuff and not jazz. And that's one of the great things nowadays, just being able to check out so much cool music all the time, and so many great players everywhere. So
yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well,
in addition, I listened to your record, which is amazing, and I've been listening. Yeah, it's so beautiful. You should be so proud of that, man. It's great. And then
thank you so
listening, much. Actually, yeah, of course. And then all this stuff that Colin Shook is doing with the Monks live streams, I've been checking. As time allows, I've been trying to check out some of those and just hear people in the community again that I've maybe didn't get to hear enough before, or I just kind of miss hearing and playing with them. So I've all that kind of stuff. And I think it's maybe something important to say, like the local scene of players. There's something to be said for checking out your actual people in your area, in your scene as much as you can. And that's something that I need to be better about. I realize kind of whenever this all, the quarantine kind of goes past, I'm always in such a crunch with teaching and gigs, and I'm just on this constant, cycle. I'm always rushing from one thing to the next, so that I rarely feel like if I have a moment like, oh man, I'm going to go hang and check out all this music. And it's like, that's something that I'm hoping to be better about and be part of the scene. Cause there's so many great players, and it's so cool to share and exchange music and ideas with guys in town. And that's, in a way, that's really how we all learn, in a very direct way, with the people that are in our own backyard. So,
it's very much so. And that's the whole point of this, right? The Off the Bandstand was like connecting all of us, because we don't always get to go and see each other at each other's gigs or make the hang. So it's like, we have the time. Let's bring together the environment. Man,
that's a great thing you're doing. So yeah, it's very cool. Thanks for reaching out to me, but it's a great initiative to see what all these people in the community are doing, to make it happen. So yeah,
man. Well, last question for you, man. I'm sure. I wanted to make sure to leave enough time for you to be able to go grab a bite to eat or something like that.
No, that's okay.
So the question we always end with is, we have no shortage of gigs from hell stories where it's just something went wrong, or it was, not to certainly not to badmouth any clients. I want to work when the pandemic ends, so it's not from that perspective, but just any combination of just oh my God, this happened. It's just what is going on right now? So what's your craziest gig story that you can think of that I guess is
wow
to say?
Yeah. Boy, there's been a handful. One that sticks out, and I'll just I'll keep things sort of anonymous and generic.
Sure.
Because this was also, I kind of started as a full-time player pretty late compared to a lot of people. I I guess, mid-20s when I started kind of official formal study of music, you know, mid 24, 25, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of like early gigs. I mean, I was just so green. You know, and I don't have an undergrad in music. So there was just a lot of holes. There are still a lot of holes there that I'm always trying to plug musically and professionally and all that sort of stuff. But I remember at the time I hadn't gigged all that much, but you know, I was doing a lot of kind of wedding band, cover band, things like this. And we were doing an out of town gig. Anyway, I want to say it might have been Midland, Odessa. I don't think it was as far as El Paso or anything.
Out there.
It was out there. It was one of those ones where you're driving all day and then you load in, play the gig, and they were putting us up overnight. And boy, so many things went wrong. But you know, they wanted as the wedding song, they wanted the fight song as part of their wedding, and it was one of these things. I mean, everybody was just getting loaded. I mean, everyone was hammered, and it was there was a lot of problems leading up to this, and then this was just like the culmination was that when it was time for the fight song. We didn't play it, but it was like at that point you would be able to like download music from iTunes, you know, to play on an iPod. That was kind of how people were doing stuff like that. And I mean, bless his heart, the band leader got the wrong fight song because I think he probably just got up, and it was one of these moments where, you know, the band's on stage. It was this big, you know, cake cutting and this whole big thing, and the crowd was partying really hard. The gig was already not going super great. And then when that happened, like the whole room turned and looked as I remember it. And it was one of these things like, I thought it was going to be a brawl. Like I thought it was going to, and from what I remember, it was one of these things where it was like we had to pack up and go for our personal safety, like right away, you know. So yeah, and that's how I remember it. I think that's how it went down, but I'll never forget that moment. You know, I was sitting in the front with a few horns there, and then everybody turned, and they were, you know, a rowdy crowd they were looking to start some trouble anyway, you know. And man, when that happened, I mean, my heart sank. I didn't know how we were going to get out, and it was just like an emergency. It was like pack up and go right now. You're done. This is over. So
my God.
That's probably
or were they like chasing after? Were they like screaming, yelling, or like anything like that?
Well, they were holding back some of the guys. Yeah, there was a few people were pretty belligerent, like a few like real big dudes too. And so this was long enough ago. I can't remember how much my brain has kind of manipulated that story, but I do remember it was one of those horrifying moments. Like it was more than just like, and I've had plenty of other things where I've forgotten whatever the stuff that happens. That's embarrassing. But this was on a whole other level of like, oh my goodness. So that was probably the worst. And there's a lot more details I couldn't go into, but I don't want to name names or say anything like that. But it was, but we made it out. We made it back, and then we got back to this hotel they put us up in, and it was real run down, and there was all kinds of shenanigans. There was, there's like hookers and people partying, and there was like I think maybe a music festival in an adjacent lot, and so there was and this was a cheap hotel, so it's like. And we had tuxes and gear, and we're loading in, and it's like this was just not the right spot in town for us to figure. And this is after being defeated. So then we had to load in all this gear and our tuxes in this hotel where I thought for sure we were going to get mugged or somebody's going to see all the gear and try to take something. So we just like went to the room, closed the blinds, locked the door, and it was like that's it.
People have to sleep in shifts because they're watching the gear and making sure that people don't bust down the door. Jeez.
Oh man, yeah. So that was a bad one for sure. Anyway, well, I don't know if that was very entertaining, but
no, it's incredibly entertaining. Thank you for thank you for reliving that for my enjoyment and for the listener's enjoyment. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and a word, I mean, to state the obvious, if somebody requests a fight song, make sure you know which one it is and what team they're really requesting it for, especially in Texas and probably all the big football states. So
absolutely. Well, man, everybody check out the Monk show that you've got next Tuesday.
That should be fun. That's next Tuesday, August 18th at 7:30, and it's a mix. I mean, I try to do some different kind of songbook standards, some different jazz standards. I put together an arrangement. We'll do an original, and I'm looking forward to playing. I'm weirdly a little nervous because I haven't played. This is maybe the longest I've gone without playing with other people. So I'm just, it'll be exciting and different, and I'm looking forward to it. Well, man, thanks for the opportunity to plug that. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. And everybody check out, is it RussellHaight.com?
RussellHaight.com. And I need to, that's, going forward, I know I need to be more active on social media. That's something I look forward on working on that in the coming months and years. So,
well, everybody check out Destination. Another CD. I had doubled up the CDs in here for one reason or another. You know how cars are.
Yeah.
So, anyways, everybody check out Destination. It's available on all those streaming platforms. But buy music.
It is
from artists. Please buy music so that way we can continue to do what we do. Russell, man, thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait until we can see each other in person. But anytime, I'll definitely check out the live stream. That's going to be really great. I'm excited.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, Christian, and congrats on the new album and this podcast that you're doing. So
I appreciate it, man. Well, we'll talk soon.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Yeah. Peace.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.